right. Hello and welcome to another edition of Better Minneapolis. Today I'm here with Diane Krenz, who's running for Hennepin County Attorney. Did I pronounce that right? Krenz?
Yes, but
Okay.
You can do it with the TZ sound or you can do it with just the Z sound.
Okay. Happy to have you here today. We've interviewed a lot of people running for Hennepin County Attorney. Like to hear what your background is and what's your motivation for running?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin on a dairy farm in Eau Claire County, just outside of Eau Claire. I'm one of 7 kids with a very large extended bunch of family members. Learned to do a lot of hard work on the farm, learned a lot of common sense type of things. I went to undergrad at UW Eau Claire. I lived on campus. I didn't just commute, even though the farm was only about 15 miles away.
Okay.
And then I came to the Twin Cities to go to law school, and I went to Hamlin Law School back in the day when it was a standalone law school. And the whole purpose of going to law school was to be a prosecutor. I knew very early on that that's what I wanted to do. And I think the reason I wanted to be a prosecutor is, some people are very motivated by the whole idea of an underdog. And a lot of people go into public defense work if they feel like they're going to help an underdog, and I understand that. But for me, it was people who've been victimized. Mm-hmm. And so to me, being a prosecutor was helping people who had, been abused, been stolen from, whatever, but victims were really kind of my focus. And I started working at the Hennepin County Attorney's office while I was still in law school. Actually, it kept me from quitting law school because I hated it. I always jokingly say if I was forced to go back in a time machine to law school, I wouldn't get into it because it was really very different than college, and it was a very small school.
And what about the Hennepin County office interest motivated you to stay in and stay with it?
Well, once I got there, I met people who were really lawyers. So I worked in the appellate division, and my job, the Court of Appeals this was 1983, the Court of Appeals had only been established it was around that time, maybe a few years earlier. And so my job as the law clerk for the appellate division was to read every single new case that was issued by the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court and write a little synopsis of it, because back then there was no internet. You couldn't do a lot of research on a computer or anything. And so this gave the attorneys in the appellate division a reference thing, and then the secretary would put it all into a 3-ring binder this thick.
Okay.
And it was all tabbed and indexed with different issues like Fourth Amendment or whatever. So I did that.
So that's definitely very old school. No,
yes.
I think now they probably have AI generated summaries of all that. And
they probably do. I wouldn't trust that. I mean, before I left the office, we all got Westlaw, and it's now like doing a Google search to find cases, which is fabulous, because when Westlaw first came along, you had to put these things called wingdings in there in these really weird formats. Like, I don't get it. But that was the first job I had in law. I loved the people I worked with. Mm-hmm. They were so real. They were really committed to what this work was. They treated me really well. And I thought, this is really where I want to be. After appellate work, I toyed with the idea of going to some other prosecutor's office because there were some changes going under. I mean, this goes back to when Tom Johnson was the county attorney. That's how long ago. So there were some changes going on with their law clerk program, but I was fortunate enough to get hired out of the law clerk program. I did juvenile prosecution for about 5 years. I moved to doing adult criminal cases, and then moved on to eventually being on the gang team when Amy Klobuchar was the head of the office. And then when Mike Freeman came back, I was referred to as the gun gal. So the office used to have a grant, federal grant, to prosecute gun crimes. And it was all felon in possession of a firearm cases where there were no other crime alleged. So I did all of those for the office. And then after Freeman came back, there were a few more changes. So I went and moved to the property team. And because Hennepin County is so big, we have all these different teams that do things. And on that team, we would prosecute for certain suburbs. Like for a while, Bloomington was a suburb. I did all their felony property cases. The 4th Precinct of Minneapolis. I did Eden Prairie for a while. I also, that division did nuisance actions, so houses that were like houses of prostitution or drug houses. I had anything north of Highway 55. My supervisor had all nuisance houses south of 55.
Well, I don't want to go off on too big of a tangent, but I've heard some horror stories about nuisance houses in the city that it's, they can't get rid of them. And in fact, they had the one shooting take place where the basically person was mentally unstable and they couldn't get him out of his house and I think that's being prosecuted by the Hennepin County Attorney now too.
Yeah. Well, we had a pretty vigorous team that did it. Well, it was 3 of us, but we had, we were dealing with things also like on the north side there was a bar called Johnny A's back in the day, and it was an open air drug den, and there were prostitutes working out of it, going behind the dumpster, and the bouncers were in on all of it. And in that one we worked with Minneapolis licensing for the bar and a couple of other groups in order to, they voluntarily gave up their liquor license. We didn't wind up having to take an action. But I did have one in Brooklyn Park that I had to go to trial on. 44 witnesses in less than an hour. Because every Brooklyn Park cop had been there. But it was a woman who owned a house, and she was just terrorizing the neighborhood. She and her kids were terrorizing the neighborhood. So
So after all those witnesses, were you able to get them out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, she didn't have a lawyer. Now, it wasn't like I cheated on anything, but there wasn't a lot of questioning of those witnesses. But, I think it's a valuable thing that the county attorney's office takes on. It's a statute that also the city attorney can use and the attorney general can use. But to my knowledge, our office probably had the most robust nuisance thing. And before I left, I retired in early April of 2025. I was back on the nuisance thing, and it was mostly like the northern side of Minneapolis had a very active group of city staff and police officers and a city attorney and a county attorney, and we'd go through and review different properties. I don't know when the last time was that the office did any litigation about it, but I found it to be a good thing because the neighbors certainly were happy, and it cut down on crime in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, I know I've had friends who've had like drug houses across the street from them. It's motivated some people to even jump in and run for city council because neighbors get so upset over some of these houses, but it often seems it's difficult to, and it takes a long time. But getting back to your background, I heard 83 in there, and then you retired in 2025. So that
Yes.
sounds like a good, healthy time. Is that right?
Yes, yes, including all my law clerk time where I wasn't technically a Hennepin County employee. Yeah, I was there for over 40 years.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
you really know the ins and outs, and you spent a lot of time in the courtroom prosecuting.
Yes.
It sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Because when I was on the property team, I also did the career offender people. So these were guys with anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 prior offenses, strictly property offenders. And they were, my goal was to get them a healthy enough sentence to protect the public. I mean, we had people who were just serial burglars.
Well, let's talk about that a minute, because I would say that there's probably a lot of residents of Hennepin County who feel like enough isn't being done about repeat offenders, particularly juveniles, whether it's property crimes, stealing stuff out of garages, whatever it is, to stealing cars and having multiple cars. Our own house was broken into this past year, and it's one of those things where like, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, do you think there needs to be a different approach to, kind of stopping that youth repeat offenders, or are people kind of getting the statistics wrong, and they take one incident and sort of blow it up, or what do you think things
not
are?
having been in that division for a while, I don't really know the exact numbers. I do know from friends of mine and former colleagues who work there. There are a lot of repeat people, and of course, it's kind of a gradation of things. Are you looking at somebody who's stealing from the corner store or from Target, as opposed to the kids who are running around with guns shooting people? And there's always such a wide range of things that you can do, but I do really agree that you need to focus on kids who are repeatedly doing the same thing. One of the issues in juvenile cases is before you even get a kid charged with the first 5 felonies, especially auto thieves, they've racked up another 5 of them. And, I don't know if I know part of the issue is probation doesn't do as much anymore with kids on probation.
What do you mean by that? Like follow-up meetings, checking in on them?
Yeah, that's some of it. And, they don't have the county homeschool anymore.
Yeah, that's another one on my list. That's actually
Yeah.
what brought my wife and I to the Twin Cities areas, because she was hired as a social worker at the Hennepin County
wow.
Homeschool. And, we've always been of the opinion that they did really great work. They had some talented social workers, and for a lot of the kids who entered the program, it was the first time they got mental health services, or so it did a lot. But I think they've since shut it down. They've changed the philosophy that they want to have, I guess, more in the neighborhood type approach. So what are your thoughts? Because you can prosecute these kids, but right now there's really...
Right. And the county homeschool, sir, it took a while for a kid to get to the county homeschool, by the way. It wasn't like first offense and you got taken out of your home, because they have to look at, what's in the best interests of the child, and sometimes it's not in the best interests to go out there. But it's all fine and well to say there's community programs, but if they're not being funded and if there aren't any to find, or they aren't good community programs, I see it as a really big problem. They're really stuck right now with only having Red Wing to send somebody to as a violent offender. And that's why I think I was there so long ago that EJJ, extended juvenile jurisdiction, didn't even exist. We only had certification or juvenile. But that's one of the reasons I think they put the EJJ piece in, was because there were kids that needed stronger sanctions, but not sent to adult court yet. And I think I don't think they're using certification very much anymore on some people. I don't know how effective the EJJ is. I know one of the issues that's been happening is someone can be on EJJ for a very serious offense. They commit a new offense, and the office is currently not revoking them on the EJJ.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of a problem. I mean,
And just so that non-insiders like me understand
yes.
that, so the EJJ as your client, I think, is where they go to a community program. And you're saying like they get into that program for kind of a lesser offense, but if they commit a greater offense, they still end up staying in that same community setting.
Well, EJJ, so I think that there's age parameters on it, but that means that the juvenile system can have jurisdiction over them until they're 21 as opposed to 18. So if a kid, let's say first time robbery maybe, and they've never had much of a history before, but they really shouldn't just be in real community-based probation stuff. They have EJJ, which has more enhanced probation things as well that they can do. I mean, regular juvenile stuff is all community-based. EJJ would be community-based, but then certification generally means a prison sentence. The hammer over somebody's head on an EJJ is that they have an adult sentence hanging over their head. So robbery, first time robbery, 48 months in prison, that is hanging over your head. If you do everything successfully, you're not going to have that sanction. Mm-hmm. If you violate, however, you could go to prison for that 48 months.
So do you think Hennepin County has the right mix right now? Or do they... I mean, okay, so what do you think it should be? What should be different than what's being done now?
I mean, I think that, I don't know if you're a parent, but as parents know that kids need really quick sanctions. They need really quick consequences, because that teaches them something more than, getting charged with something a year later, right? And sometimes you can't help that. But I think more immediate consequences, it all has to be focused on what that kid needs. And, sometimes being put in a diversion program is fine. My understanding is now that our juvenile division youth division in Hennepin County is sending people to diversion 3 times. And it's like, well, I'm a believer in, you can have chances. Mm-hmm. I really think that, especially kids, you need to work with them. However, there are kids that need much more immediate sanctions, that need to be held in custody, that need to go have more intensive programming. And I don't really understand the concept of restorative justice is fine. I'm not sure a lot of the victims I've dealt with in my life would have been happy with that.
Yeah, I've heard other people talk about it should be an option if the victim is open to it. But I want to follow up there, on what you explained, because I feel like it's caused some consternation, if you will, by the different police forces where they feel like they arrest someone, they send it to Hennepin County, and then they get let go or don't have those immediate sanctions that you're talking about. And there's also sort of stance, I guess, that they feel like the current prosecutor, Moriarty, is more interested in finding fault with the police than she is with actually prosecuting crimes. So I guess the short question here after all that is, how do you think you can build back that relationship with not just with the Minneapolis police, which is often, in the headlines, but the larger universe of 33 different police jurisdictions in Hennepin County?
They know me.
Okay.
I have worked with every single police department in Hennepin County. I have worked with the BCA. I've worked with the Department of Revenue in cases. I've worked with innumerable police departments from other jurisdictions as well. One of my, claims to fame is putting together large, complex cases, especially identity thefts, that stretch through as many as 10 to 15 counties, and sometimes up to 30 or 40 police departments. By the time, after being in property for 10 years, and then what I wound up doing at the last 7 years was white collar crime. There were certain police departments who would call me and say, would you take this case? Would you do this? I mean, I have personally worked with the chiefs of police when they were regular line cops, street cops, back in the day. So I think I have a unique relationship with them that others might not have, because they know who I am and what I'm about. They know I don't want to say hard charging. I'm a reasonable person to deal with. One of the things I've loved to do in this job, and when I was on the gang team and then on the property team in white collar, was work with the police to help build a case. Sometimes they'd call and say, what do you think of this? And I'd say, that's not worth following up on. Mm-hmm. Or here's some ideas of how you should make this case. And so I generally have a reputation throughout Hennepin County and some of other areas of being someone who is willing to work with the police, to always take a phone call from them, to meet with them. I know that I talked to some police officers after the county attorney's office came out with the policy of not charging cases from traffic stops.
Yeah.
And one of the people asked, well, how are you going to have a different, Minneapolis has this policy, how can you treat us differently? And I said, because the suburbs are very different. Your crime is very different. The expectations from your citizens in some ways are different. The types of work you do is very different. And I would say that would not be my policy, because if you're stopping a car and getting guns out of it, if it's an appropriate, legal, constitutional stop, then it should be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. So I've talked to some police officers about some of these issues and some of the policies. For example, when speaking about kids and juveniles, the whole idea that that police are not going to interview a juvenile suspect, without trying to find a parent or a guardian and contacting an attorney for that kid beforehand is, why bother even talking to them? Now, I know a lot of people don't ever talk. That's fine. That is 100% their right not to do that. I also don't think the police are scaring kids into confessing to anything. In my career of 40 plus years, I don't know of very many cases that have had false confessions, which is apparently what that rule is about. And in talking to the police, they're like, well, we're just not going to talk to these kids. Mm-hmm. And then you think, what about the victims? So if what stands between you being able to charge something is talking to a kid who gives you something or even doesn't give you anything, and the homicide that was committed, that seems unfair to victims, and a little bit more strenuous requirements than what are really necessary under the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, the origins of that particular rule. I mean, it seems like a lot of these things come out because at some point there was an abuse of power or the situation.
Generally in another state. Generally not in Minnesota. I can tell you that.
But you mentioned your experience with gangs, and I wanted to circle back to that because there was recently pretty high-profile arrest. I think they're called Family Mob.
Family Mob, I know them.
Oh, okay,
Fact,
so they've been around a while?
The one that, Family Mob has been around for a long time. The one person, so they had that list on one of my X feeds of who they all had in custody and who they didn't. And one of them was a guy named Kyron Williams. And I'm like, oh, he was a guy that they were going after when I was on the gang team in the early 2000s. So he just has never stopped.
Well, I mean, it was a little bit surprising because they weren't young.
No.
I mean, at least the leaders that they
Yes.
arrested were, I think some were one was maybe in his 50s, there were some in
Yes.
their 40s, 30s. So you have to assume they've been somehow able to stay out of jail to move their way up the hierarchy or
they were in jail and they got out.
okay.
That's always the other thing.
So what confused me a little, well, first of all, I was totally impressed that they had a dozen different agencies working on the case and somehow they didn't leak it to anybody. I don't know how that is even possible. But there was, at the press conference, it was the U.S. Attorney Rosen. Why would he be responsible for prosecuting that case versus Hennepin County? How does that get decided?
So,
Is that because it's like RICO or?
well, I don't know what they have them charged with. I didn't look it up to see what they were charged with. So the way that system works is the feds can take cases if they have what we call a federal jurisdictional hook. If it comes under mail fraud, if it comes under wire fraud, if there's something, and these are cases off that aren't on any Native American reservations. They can do certain crimes. They don't have to, though. I can tell you that I think that there are some agencies that just do not want cases coming to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office anymore. And the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has to take everything. We can't be like the feds who are like, we only want to take some of that crime. We're kind of an all or nothing type of thing. The general wisdom is that the feds have more, the U.S. Attorney's Office has more resources, more time to devote to those kind of things, and so sometimes law enforcement wants to go to them instead. And sometimes it's simply what's the sentence you can get. And like, for example, when I was the gun gal, George W. Bush was the president, and the U.S. attorney actually at that time, that woman took a lot of gun cases, and they sometimes can get more than what we could on a state case. So my sense, never having worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office and not knowing everything about how they make their decisions, is that this was I've seen different, when it's a different presidential administration, they focus on different things. And some like to really focus on violent crime and drugs, and some like to really focus on the white-collar stuff. I would guess some of this is because they had done those native mob cases too. under Andy Luger. So I suspect that some of it of having that experience, and it all depends upon who is bringing, which law enforcement agencies are bringing it to.
So, speaking of the feds, we're in this unprecedented time where feds are coming in and committing crimes and wanting to basically handle those investigations themselves or leave. And so Moriarty and I think Ellison are both trying to get evidence and go after some of these federal people like Bovino and stuff. What do you think of that strategy? Are they likely to be successful? Are they doing enough, or is this more for show and the feds can kind of still stonewall them without any repercussions? Because that's what it feels like right now. They're
Right.
just
And it's hard for me to know without what all the facts are, and we're all bombarded so much with a lot of social media bits and pieces. I mean, I've seen the video of Bovino with the gas can and stuff. It's hard to know what is politically motivated versus motivated to get justice for the community type of thing. And I don't know what their likelihood of success would be. I mean, I've never worked in the federal system, but I do know that it is not easy to get information from them if they don't want to give that to you. I can give you one small example from my career. When I was in the white collar crime team, we did all voter fraud cases. And I had a case to review that the feds had looked at, and 2 months before the statute of limitations expired, they decided to give it back to our office to do. I looked at it, and I'm like, well, there's some stuff missing here. I don't get what's going on. So I called the FBI agent, and the feds had done a grand jury on it. And I said, well, I can't even review this case if they've interviewed all the witnesses and have grand jury testimony. And he went to, this was when Andy Luger was still there, and asked them, and they called me and they said, well, we're not going to give you all of it, even if you ask. So I know that there's a variety of reasons that federal prosecutors and federal investigators can choose not to turn things over. So I don't know, is it grandstanding? You be the judge of that.
Okay.
I can just tell you I don't know very much about that. And, my focus is how do we refocus on what the real job of the office is, which is, holding people to account with the proper consequences, reestablishing relationships with the police, because I think that's huge and needs to be done, and then really vindicating victims' rights and not letting victims find out the minute they when they walk into the courtroom that there's going to be a plea and they've never been told what the plea is going to be. So
let's talk about proper consequences. I mean, there's a wide variety of opinions on what those could be. I mean, you mentioned the diversion programs, probably shouldn't be diverting people 3 times. It sounds like you've got a lot of experience prosecuting gun crimes. And also Hennepin County, from what I understand, their jail is full, right? And I mean, I think the state sued them to move some people. So how is your office going to balance all those things where we don't want to kind of have a permanent record for juveniles who can be rehabilitated, and we also still want to make sure that hardened criminals aren't on the street. So how do you go about hitting the right balance?
Right. Well, one thing is there is a distinction between the jail, which is pretrial detention.
Mm-hmm.
So you get arrested, you get charged, you're sitting in jail. If you don't make bail or you're not released until your trial or a plea and sentencing. And then Hennepin County has its workhouse. So probationary sentences usually wind up in some time out at the workhouse. And I don't think the workhouse has the same problem that the jail has. And then certain circumstances, there's the prison system. So, and I know now with them shutting down Stillwater, I don't know what kind of space they're going to have, but I guess they have Rush City, and Rush City has never been a very full facility.
Mm-hmm.
At least it wasn't a few years ago. So the consideration about, overpopulation is one thing. I mean, all of this really is on a case-by-case basis of what someone's done. I don't agree with sending everybody to prison. There are some people you don't even ask for a workhouse sentence on because of a variety of reasons. But, because most people get work release or they get some sort of home monitoring type of thing. But the workhouse is there for certain people. And then the prison for the people who are just, murderers, the people who are sexual assault people, sexual assault defendants, you name it. I mean, the very hardcore types of crimes, no matter what your record is. And then the people who are the repeat offenders. I mean, that is one of the things that I really saw in doing career offenders is people who, they had been shoved along in the system with, a year, and some property offenses. I mostly focus on property because that's what I did, but some property offenses, it'll be a year and a day. It'll be maybe 36 months. I had one guy I prosecuted for the 10 years I did career offenders 4 times. And he'd get out, he'd commit an offense while he was still on parole, and it wasn't consecutive, so his parole time would run out while he was waiting for trial in the next one, and then he'd go to prison and sit there. So, some of these people really do deserve an extreme focus. And the same way with, like, murder. And you have to be discerning about which cases and how you charge them in terms of first-degree murder. I know that the current posture of the office, nobody wants people charged with first-degree murder. I have gone to the grand jury, indicted, and tried several first-degree murderers. Every single one of those people are people that deserved the life sentence that they got. And, you have to it's weird because, it's one of these jobs where the classic lawyer answer for everything is, well, it depends.
Yeah.
And that's what depends in here. But I think I wouldn't worry about, where people wind up. That would be the Department of Corrections issue, and the community corrections people, the DOCCR. But, you got to do justice for people, and you got to protect people. And sometimes the best way to protect people is to have somebody locked up in prison. And sometimes, like for example, under Mike Freeman, they worked into vets court and drug court and DWI court and mental health court, which are things that really are valuable to help certain offenders. But people, as some people have said to me, some people just need to sit down too.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned victims a lot and wanting to protect them. So how does the a county office need to change, you think, to make sure the victims are feeling like their voice is being heard in the current decision-making, I guess?
So there's a victims' rights statute in Minnesota. There's certain things we must do. I was in the office at the time that all was still coming to the fore. There is a very very well trained group of people already in that office. Part of what's happened over the years is there's been, as with any organization, there's always personalities and internal politics and things. But victim advocates need to be told what's happening with a case, and that is on the lawyer to do. Mm-hmm. So being a good baby boomer, I was raised with, it's easy to guilt me into doing things. Okay. And we used to have a lot of lectures of, you lawyers always need to tell victim witness what's happening on your case. And that's what's really important. What I think has been currently happening is that victim advocates are not being told in advance what's happening on cases, or being told things too late or information wrong. I think we need to, one of the whole reasons that I'm running is to right the ship. This job was my life for 40 plus years. I had a life outside of my job, but I did it because I loved it. I still love it. And that division needs to go back to what it was, where it was doing very good work and there wasn't secrecy about things, and people were being told things up front to be able to communicate with their victims.
So I want to finish things up with a question about the pressure of this job, because every Hennepin County attorney has faced some situation that has thrust them into a situation they did not predict, right? Whether it was Floyd or, one of the other many killings that have occurred. And of course now, in addition, we've got this interaction with the federal government. So what do you think has prepared you for that kind of intense spotlight pressure?
Mm-hmm. Being a trial attorney.
Okay.
Being a trial attorney is a team sport in many ways. Some people wouldn't believe it, but I have to rely on my paralegal, the cops, and my secretary and victim witness people to help me with things. But I am the person standing there. I am the person who is figuring out the strategy of how to present this case to the jury, to think on my feet when something is challenged, to be able to present to the judge a legal argument, and then to stand in front of a jury and argue that case to the best of my ability. And, that stress has certainly been a crucible for me to be able to, and I'm just old enough that, call me whatever you want. I'm going to do what I think is the just and right thing. And I know what the just and right thing is because I've done it for so long. I've learned from my mistakes, type of thing. And also I think, we have ethical obligations, and as prosecutors, special ones that nobody else has. And we are supposed to not go in front of the press and try to inflame them, or to try to inflame the public with things, or to try to promise things that we're not supposed to. I, quite honestly, in the 40 years I was there, it was always icky that this is a political position. I can understand why it's not an appointed position. I don't have a problem with people being elected. I don't like it being a political thing, because when decisions are made for political reasons, that is not always conducive to getting justice for the case, justice for the victim and justice for the defendant. So
is that a way of implying that things have become too political in the office at this point?
Well, I will tell you, I was one of the people who criticized, and I wrote a letter to the editor of the Star Tribune about Ms. Moriarty's decision to put the guy who scratched all the Teslas to the tune of $30-some thousand in diversion and pre-charge diversion, because nobody else got treated that way. You know, you got to have standards. And
right.
If the standard is you don't put somebody in that program if the damage is more than $5,000 or the loss is over $5,000, with some exceptions, you know, that appeared to me to be a political decision. And as I wrote in that letter, she has some explaining to do to the people on the north and south side of Minneapolis as to why some of their family members are getting records, and this guy is not. Even if you, no matter what your political belief is, it's like you don't cut somebody slack because of who they are or what the crime was that they committed if it's political. And I think you just really have to stay away from that sort of thing.
So, as a way of ending here, is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure you told people about? And then is there a way that you'd like people to find out more about you if they're interested?
Sure. Fraud is a big topic right now, and that truly is one of my fortes. Right now,
But will any of that be going through Hennepin County?
Well, that is a good question, because when we talked earlier about the feds, a lot of that could have been coming through our office, but the white-collar crime team is a bit depleted right now.
Okay.
And, you know, there are decisions made as to where cases are going to go. But our office could have tried to charge, we could have charged Feeding Our Future. Frankly, because it was not Medicaid money that was being used for that. When COVID came and went and there was a lot of rent help fraud, our office prosecuted a ton of that. A ton of any grant fraud, the office does. And so that's one of the things that it's close to me because it's what I did last, and I absolutely love that work. A lot of people, 10,000, 150,000 pages of documents, that's boring. And it's like, oh my God, it's great stuff. So that is something that I'm very interested in having the office get back to doing, is the real fraud prosecution. And to that end, was when I retired, one of the police officers that I know through the BCA asked me if I would take a job in outstate Minnesota, because outstate Minnesota has a really hard time keeping prosecutors, and especially people with experience. And so I am currently a special assistant Hubbard County Attorney.
Okay.
And I'm doing a case up there that is arson and insurance fraud. So I think that that's something else we need to refocus. You know, the office has a certain budget. 90% of that goes for salaries. As I told you beforehand, was a long-term AFSCME member, very active in AFSCME. So to me, salaries are important for the people that work there.
Well, I thought, this is maybe a whole nother topic, but it was interesting that Moriarty actually went out and hired a different, private firm to come in and review a case. And I thought, boy, that's expensive. And I think she even had to ask for more money from maybe the state. Are there times when you think doing that is going to be appropriate? I mean, if you've got a big white collar crime and you don't have enough staff for it, do you go outside?
The office has never done that. Since I've been there, there has been a white collar crime team with 5 attorneys, and we used to have more investigators. They're down to 1, but they used to have 2, a paralegal, and lots of resources in the white collar. I have done cases with, millions of dollars of loss. So the office can handle that. Yeah.
Okay.
That was a special situation. The money that she got, she took, my understanding, was from the forfeiture money. So the county attorney's office gets forfeiture money and stuff, and that money was used for training people, and now apparently it's gone. So in any event, my deal is refocusing on what the real business of Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office is. And if people have any questions, if they want to look at my website, it's just Diane Krenz, all one word, .com.
Okay.
And there's email addresses on there, and I'm looking forward to getting out more into the community. With everything that's been going on, it's kind of been hard to get out, but meet people, shake hands, let them know who I am, what I think needs to be changed, and to take that 40 years of experience and get us back on track.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you for coming in today and going through all that with us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
All
Thanks.
right. You're welcome.